inHEART story begins as a research project 12 years ago. So I'm a radiologist working with cardiac imaging. And at that time, I was doing a PhD on the structural substrates behind cardiac arrhythmias. And so I met Pierre 12 years ago, and I entered his lab. And the first thing I noticed is that it was a mess. The data he was working with seemed to me, an outsider, very complex. But at the same time, I saw that he was using a 3D catheter localization technology, and this uh, uh, made it possible to localize his signals and the origins of the arrhythmias in my images. So this is what launched what was originally a research program where we were correlating electrophysiological findings with characteristics of the myocardial tissue on MRI or on CT as acquired prior to the interventions. So this was a research project for the first years. And we soon learned critical areas in the image that were matching the critical isthmuses of VT. And we started integrating this in our therapeutic approach. So at first, when we were communicating this in scientific meetings, everyone was saying, okay, these are the nice images from Bordeaux, but how can I get that in my lab? So very soon we launched an academic program where people could send their images and we would send back 3D models. And it soon got out of hand beyond the reach of a research program because a lot of centers were willing to join. So in 2017, we had the idea to launch inHEART as a company in order to provide this as a service, knowing that this expertise can travel because images can travel, but patients cannot. So this was the idea that we got. And I think it changed a bit the way electrophysiologists approach these arrhythmias, right, Pierre?
Oh, completely, yes. It's been a game changer to meet you, Hubert, and to meet, in fact, cardiac imaging for me. I can maybe, before you launch the videos, explain a little bit how it was perceived on my side as, well, finally, the end user of what we have created together with inHEART and the academic program you mentioned. You know, I'm a cardiologist. I'm specialized in electrophysiology, and I know nothing about cardiac imaging. I mean, I can understand that there is a lot of information that could be useful for me treating patients, but I have no access because I'm not really an expert in slice images, and I'm not keen to become a second Hubert or a radiologist. So I thought it would be much easier for me to get some 3D reconstructions that would display really accurately the anatomy of my patient with the substrate in it. And so that was what we've been working on and what inHEART is delivering now. And so if you want to show the images, we may go through what it really delivers. So we have, you know, the left part of the slide, which you know, where we do the classical EP mapping, where we have access to the substrate, but in 2D, it's only what is in contact with the electrodes that can be described by mapping. And if you think about the third dimension, the thickness of the LV, because it's often in the LV that the arrhythmia comes from, it's much less accurate. In fact, we have pretty much no idea. I was struck by this demonstration by the group of Katja Zippenfeld, where they showed that if you have only 2 millimeters of healthy tissue between your electrode and the scar, you miss the scar. So it's very limited. And it breaks my heart to admit it because I've been devoting my entire life to better understand and read those electrograms. This is really what I'm good at, and we've been working a lot on that. But I must admit that there are additional information in those images that are really useful for us to take care of those patients. And to me, this experience was like if all of a sudden we were switching on the light in a dark room, you know, we were doing these ablations in a dark room, and now we have access to much more details. And this is shown on the right side, a part of the slide where you have the scar that is so nicely described by these images. You get that before the ablation, so you have a chance to look at it before you get to the lab. You have a chance to discuss those with your patient, and you have a chance to discuss this with your colleagues to define what the ablation strategy will be. And this has been really useful. And I don't know if you want to comment on the correlation we observed, because this is of course important between the electrograms and the images. We've been working a lot on that.
Yeah, it's been in fact the origin of the project, where we were seeing abnormal features in the images, and we were willing to compare that with electro or EP findings. So we've been extensively correlating scar transmurality from MR with voltage, wall thinning from CT with voltage, with late potentials or fractionated electrograms mapped during sinus rhythm. And what was really something that gave us an even more precise or higher level of proof was when the high density mapping system came on the market. So these arrhythmia systems, for instance, that were for the first time allowing us to map the scar with a lot of details. So we've been relating our imaging findings with these high density maps, demonstrating that some features in the images, and particularly on CT scan, channels or corridors of relatively preserved thickness, this is a color coding of the thickness, within severely thin infarcts, were hosting critical isthmuses of ventricular tachycardia. And this was for us a proof that was much stronger than any electrogram findings in sinus rhythm. I think you would agree with that, Pierre.
Yeah, definitely. You might come back to that slide, because it's important to understand that cardiac imaging, when it comes to ventricular tachycardia at least, has been really all about MRI. And MRI is a fantastic modality, but the spatial resolution is not so good. And it's much higher with CT scan. And so at some point of time, we sat down with Hubert and said, look, maybe we should investigate what CT scan can do on the ventricular substrate for ventricular tachycardia. And this is a complete surprise. We had no idea that CT scan could describe so nicely the myocardial scar. At least I had no idea. And more importantly, it shows a very heterogeneous distribution of the wall thickness in the scar. And so what you see in dark red, as Hubert said, is an area of extreme thinning, meaning that there is almost only fibrosis here from the infarction, from the injury. And these red areas act as barriers for the propagation of the impulse in the scar. It's not to say that you will never find any electrical activity there. Well, you always have far-field electrograms that you may encounter in these areas, but you may also have lava or isolated potential, as some of us call them. And these potentials are typically very delayed in the red scar, the dense scar, because there is not much surviving bundles here. And I think they don't even actively participate in the circuit of the tachycardia, because their conduction properties do not allow for that. Rather, you would expect to have in fact, the isthmus matching this city channel where the wall thickness is more to the 2-4 millimeters range. This is where you have a combination of fibrosis and surviving bundles. That is the path for the reentrant VT circuit in the scar. And this is nicely demonstrated in this example. It's not just about arrhythmia. Cato catched up and Site recently catched up. And we have had demonstrations with all three systems. It doesn't matter which one you use. That in fact, those city channels were very nicely matching the VT isthmuses when we were able to induce the tachycardia, which is not always possible, and when the tachycardia was hemodynamically tolerated, which is not always there either. But when it was, it was a very good match. Now, we see more city channels than VT isthmuses, but this is probably partly due to the limitations we have when it comes to mapping VT. Again, they have to be inducible and they have to be stable so that we can map them. So it's not a surprise that we have more city channels. And I think that this type of reconstruction and images provides, in fact, a more comprehensive information about the substrate for VT, including those VT that we cannot induce or map.